Hey, this is Brad with RMAX Rebels. Today I'm going to do a how-to video on how to replace your spring with a Schmidty Racing full spring kit. This is going to come with a main spring and a spring tender. What we're going to start out with first is we are going to take a brass wire brush with some penetrating oil of your choice. I like to use WD-40. We're going to clean these threads so when we back this preload collar nut off, it will not damage any of these threads going up. And then we are going to go to this crossover ring. This crossover ring only comes on the sport models. From my understanding, the 2-seat and the 4-seat regular models, it does not have this, but you will get one with the Schmidty Racing kit. My model, it just subtracted $50 because I already had it. And according to the website, 2025 and newer, all models come with this crossover ring. And basically what this does is it helps you adjust when your tender spring, how far it goes down before it initiates your main spring. So after we get all those loose, we're going to come down here. There is a 14mm nut and a 17mm. I'm using a ratchet and socket and a wrench combo to get this off. Once we loosen the tension on the spring, we are going to remove this nut. We're going to loosen this bottom plate, and this spring setup will just slide right off. But right now I'm going to set the camera down and I'm going to try to show you how this process is done. Alright, so now that I got the camera set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply just a little bit of penetrating oil. I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to go up and down. I'm going to clean those threads. I'm going to get all that dirt out of there the best I can. I did wash the machine before, but as you know, I mean, it's hard to get all the little nooks and crannies, but you can pick one of these brushes up at a Harbor Freight or, you know, your local auto parts store. They're relatively inexpensive. Just clean that out. Going to apply a good amount of penetrating oil just to lube the threads. I'm going to take a flathead screwdriver and a hammer. This is a dead blow. Works a little bit better than a traditional hammer, but you're more than welcome to use a traditional hammer. I'm going to get on one of these little grooves and I am just going to tap it, and it's going to slowly start to work its way free. See, now that's free, I can just go ahead and spin it up by hand. And you're going to want to spin it up quite a bit, pretty much all the way to the top. There's going to be two of these on here. One's obviously tightens it down, and then these ones kind of lock it together so they don't back themselves free. You have to kind of, while there's a little bit of tension on the spring still, have to loosen that up a little bit. Now once you loosen it up a little bit, you can actually just grab this spring and you can twist it, and it'll turn that last collar until it gets to the point where there's really no pressure on this spring anymore. This setup's not going to require a spring compressor. You just have to work that thing up. Now it stopped spinning, so now I'm going to take my hand and I'm just going to work that up the rest of the way. And see, now this stuff is loose. You'll be able to see this crossover ring a little bit better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get a flat-headed screwdriver again. I'm going to do the same thing. Like I said, most models won't require this because you won't have it, but you will be putting one back on. So this one's actually pretty tight. I'm going to put a little more penetrating oil on it. That one was pretty tight, but it came off. So now I got these two that are loose. This bottom one's still a little tight, so I'm gonna kind of, like I said, most of you guys won't have to deal with this, but since my model comes with it, I have to. And then you will be putting a similar collar ring on there when you put the new springs on. But I'm gonna run this up pretty far. This machine has very little miles on it, and it's kind of a common problem for these tender springs to collapse, and it makes the machine sag, not have the proper ground clearance. So I'm just kind of trying to restore my factory ride height, and also get a little bit more performance out of the machine itself. A lot of threads here, so bear with me. All right. Now we're going to come down to here. So we're going to go 14. Now it's very important when you go to put this back in, you are going to want to put the bolt in from the front side. The reason you're doing that, if this nut were to ever come loose, your forward inertia would, you know, potentially keep the bolt from working out forward. If you put it backwards like this, the vibration, that thing could work its way out and could come loose. So it's always important to put the bolt in through the front. There's a little rubber stopper under here. I'm gonna grab a flat-headed screwdriver. We're gonna pry that up just a little bit. You don't have to go too far. And then we are going to pull this, and there's this little plate that just kind of clips on there, and then the spring holds tension on it. Once you do that, this whole setup just slides right off the shock. All right, so this is the old spring setup. This is the new spring setup. You can see main spring is roughly the same. Coils are a little tighter. They're a little bit thicker than the original. And these springs are going to be set up. They're going to have you fill out a questionnaire, like what kind of accessories you have, whether you have a winch, bumper, glass windshield, spare tire, how much your passenger weight is. So these are going to be tailored to your specific needs. So they will send you a set of instructions with it to install these. Some of the settings may be different from what I'm about to do on mine because mine was tailored for a specific weight. But you can actually go, this is the tender spring. See this little guy right there? That is the tender spring that collapses. It's a noticeable difference between the two. You can see right there, big difference. So this is going to help tremendously. On the new setup, you have this slide right here. So this slide, the long part of it goes down into the mainspring on the factory setup. These springs, it requires you to flip them. So it will be sitting with that long side going up into the actual tender spring itself. So now it'll sit like this. And I think the reasoning for that is because this is what is going to hit on that collar ring, and that's what's going to engage your lower spring. These springs being longer, now they want this pointed up. So that's what we're going to do. I did verify that with them. The instructions tells you to do that, but it doesn't specify, you know, that it's supposed to be swapped. It just, you know, says stick it long side up into the tender spring. So I did call and verify that. But right now I am going to set the camera back up over here. I'm going to slide the spring on, and we're going to show you how to wrap up this install. So this is going to be, this upper piece right here, this is going to be your shock cap. So the directions are stating they want this crossover ring positioned roughly 4 inches from the bottom of this shock cap. So I'm going to set this camera down. I'm going to get a tape measure. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go from the bottom. Actually, I had it really close. I'm going to run these down about 1/4 of an inch. And that's going to be right about 4 inches right there. So we're just going to leave that alone. We're going to grab the spring, pull this bottom of the shock out. You don't have to remove the shock. Leave the top bolt in, which is kind of nice. Let me get this. I'm going to wipe out this sleeve real quick with a wet rag so there's no dirt and debris in it. See, this is that sleeve. This is the front tender. Then we are going to put on the front mainspring. And then, try to move this camera here. We're going to put on that bottom little locking collar. Just slips on, spring sets down. Push this little rubber down because that rubber will keep that spring perch from going up. So that's that. Now I am going to put this bolt back down here at the bottom. Push it in from the front. Remember, like I said, that will potentially keep it from backing out if it ever does, if it ever wants to. If the nut comes off of it for any reason. And then what we're going to do now is, as you can see, you got this spring end, and you got both of these, the spring ends. You don't want to line them up like that. You want to turn them roughly, put this one on that side, roughly about 180 degrees. Just the springs deflect a little bit as they go down, so they kind of bend. So putting them that way, they kind of work against each other. And then what I'm going to do from here, let me get this camera going. I am going to start working down this first spring, or the first preload collar. I'm going to start working it down until it starts getting tight. Alright, I'm going to pull down a little bit, pressure on this, and I'm going to keep spinning it as much as I can. They make a spanner wrench you could use for these. I have one, but it's kind of a pain in the butt to get in there, so I just push down a little bit, keep spinning as much as you can. And then what you're going to be looking for is about 5/8 of an inch of stack preload on the front. Like I said, this may change depending on your setup, what you had them set up at, which is going to give you a total shock length of 19 7/8, and that will all be in the instructions. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to measure from the top of this spring down to the very bottom of this spring. Once you get about 19 7/8, that's where they want your preload to be. So right now, if I measure, I'm at about 20 1/4. So I want to tighten this down a little bit. And once you pull this down and tighten it a little bit, you can actually do the same thing with the spring. But you want to grab both the tender and the mainspring, because you don't want your how I had you 180 those, you want those to stay in the same spot. So you want to spin these both, and you can just start working this thing down and just keep going. Let's see where we're at now. So if I measure this, we're at about 20. So we gotta go some more. Let's see where we're at there. I'm getting pretty close. I need to go about another 1/16 of an inch or so. Okay, So that right there is 19/7/8. That's our preload adjustment. Once we get that preload adjustment, we can run the second collar back down. And we are going to tighten this down. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to tighten this up. You're going to want to tighten this top one down. You want to make sure as you're tightening it, the bottom one is not spinning, because you want it to tighten and lock them together. The whole point of this is like a jam nut. Once you get it tight, it keeps the two locked together, keep them from just spinning. So I want to make sure that get a pretty good sorry about that, I bumped the camera. So basically what we're still doing is there's no torque spec to it, just, you know, a good snug, and you know, that's where you want to be. Now that the preload is set, you're going to want to tighten the preload collars against each other, and then you're going to want to set the crossover gap, which is, that's what these rings were, and that you want the shock fully extended, you know, and the gap between, let me try to zoom this in. Oh, hold on. Sorry, I was having a little bit of camera problems. So these two nuts, there's two of them. Basically what they want is from this little nylon slider to the bottom of this first ring, they want that to be approximately 2 3/8 of an inch. So what I'll kind of do, let me set this down so I can try to do this. What we're going to do is kind of going to go 2 3/8, which is roughly about right there. So I actually got to go up with it. And the larger the distance between these rings and that divider, or that spring, this nylon piece right here, the larger the gap, the more this tender spring, the softer this tender spring, it's gonna soften this up. The shorter you put this gap is when it'll start, you know, activating the mainspring earlier on in the stroke. So the point of these crossover rings are to absorb the tender springs are to absorb, you know, the smaller stuff, give you a smaller initial spring rate, and then the heavier spring will kick in. So like I said, the larger gap between this, softer it's going to be. And this gap's pretty large because my locking collars are almost, you know, basically got probably about another 1/2 inch till they hit the top of the spring. So we're set pretty large. So this should be a fairly soft, you know, setup. You can adjust this for however you like, and that just kind of comes with experience and what kind of terrain you're doing. And this is kind of the same deal as the other one. You're going to want to tighten this down the best you can. Make sure when you're tightening, you're not spinning both collars. You're just spinning the one into each other. pretty tight there. So now that is all set up. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten the shock bolt, the bottom shock bolt back down. Down here. I'm going to put this nut on there. My preload set and my crossover collar is set. So we just got to tighten this down. And we are ready. Now, I can show before and after pictures, but if you do notice, the old springs, the old spring came up to about right here. This longer spring allowed this thing to go a lot higher. Sorry, I had the camera down. But the old spring was about to right here. You can see how this new setup, it allows the spring to go a lot higher. So this is going to give you more tender spring action, which is really going to improve your ride quality. So I'm excited to, you know, get these things set up and try them out in the trail and see what kind of difference they make. Like I said, I've noticed disimprovement in the ride after those factory tender springs collapsed, and I lost a little bit of ground clearance, so I opted to get these from Schmidty Racing, and they use Swift springs, which Swift springs is a very big spring in the market. You know, you can do your research on them. They build springs for pretty much all anything, so they've partnered with them, and they've put together a really good package. So all right, well, I hope that was helpful, and thanks for watching.